Good day, class. I'm Mark,
I'm Gonzo.
and today we're talking about how to bring your players back into your D&D game. Gonzo, why are we talking about this bringing players back? What's the problem that we're talking about today?
Well, I think we've all experienced it at some point, and that is that our players become maybe disengaged or disinterested in what's going on it's either during a game session or maybe in the overall game.
Right. They start to get kind of bored,
boring.
Not really.
That's the worst kind of D&D is boring D&D.
Yeah. And D&D can be a long game, 2-3 hours, and even though they're not, it's not like they're being distracted on their phones or not necessarily.
Right.
It's just they're not into what's going on right now in the game, and you can start to see that sometimes as a DM. So how do we fix that? Right. So I would say one problem, I think, right away, one thing that you need to look at as a DM is that are you trying to push story too much? Are you trying to push your story too much? And it's a really easy trap to fall into. You put a lot of time into this. You want to put it on rails. You have this great idea, and you just want them to get from point A to point B, and that's your thing that you created. Now, the question is this going to be your story, or is this going to be their story? Do you want the players to help?
Right, and we've talked about that before in other videos, but a lot of times when you're using like a pre-made adventure, I have Curse of Strahd right here, that can be the case pretty quickly because you're trying to cover the things that are in the pre-made adventure.
Right.
And the same thing, if you're running your own campaign, you are striving to accomplish all the things that you've worked so hard on building.
Right.
So it's not a terrible thing because this is a story that we're telling.
Yeah.
But you're right. If we're not including the players in the story in some way, shape, or form, then it becomes too much the DM story.
Yeah, it becomes like a choose your own adventure kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
Not as much fun. Yeah. And it seems to be those gamers out there know that we really like a sandboxy kind of thing where we can go all different places and do different things versus we have to go on like those old time gamers know Dragon's Lair. It's very much like hit the button right now kind of stuff. Yeah. So that it was a time and place for that. But in this game, usually that players start to get kind of bored pretty easy. Yeah. So the solution to that problem is to engage the players more by bringing their backstory into the story. Okay. So if you look at their backstory, and a lot of this can be accomplished in session 0, or even as the game unfolds, you start taking kind of notes as a DM, like, okay, they're looking for something. Looking for an old tome that has a spell book or something, bring that into it. So-and-so doesn't know who their mother is, and they want to, they're out on a quest to find out who their mother. Those little aspects you can bring into the game, and right away that makes things more interesting for the players, and it forces you to kind of not push your story down there.
Yeah, and you'll notice if you try this once or twice, and it really is just experience as you play the game more and more, is you'll notice that immediately when you include their backstory or you allow that their little side jaunt to be the focus of the story, that they are more engaged. You'll notice that not only the players whose backstory is engaged, but everyone else at the table is engaged because they, as players, when we get to play, you perceive yourself as a group and you picture the classic movies, whether it's Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or whatever. You picture yourself as a group of people who care for each other, and so when one person's backstory is coming out in front of you, Luke's finding out who his father is, it affects everybody, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of that where it doesn't matter if you're not focusing on all of their backstories at once. That'd be hard to do.
Yeah.
Especially as complicated as some of these show up at the table with.
Right.
But just hitting one part of one person's backstory can really change the feel of the game and make it feel like it's their story. Because the best movies and stories told are about the people involved. It's not about the overarching theme. It's what's going on with that one person.
Absolutely. No, I agree. Another problem with the game is that it can become unbalanced.
Okay.
And so, Gonzo, I think there's 3 pillars to the game. And so what does that unbalance look like?
So the 3 pillars of D&D are combat, exploration, and role-playing. Mm-hmm. Now, and each of these have a big part of why we play the game. The combat is pretty obvious. That's when you get to use all the things that you've acquired, your weapons, your skills that you've fine-tuned, your optimizing of your character. This is when you've you're able to use the different spells that you've learned and all those things, those feats that you've brought in the combat. But that can become, as we've talked about before, very sluggish in the game too. If you're focusing strictly on combat and you notice as a dungeon master it's going on and on, round after round, and back and forth and whatever, you can see that may be part of the reason why the game's slowing down or people are becoming disinterested. Yeah. So that's one of the things. The other one is the exploration part. That's one of my favorite parts. That's the problem-solving part of the game. That's, you walk into a room and the door closes behind you, there's sand coming in, and there's 3 levers, and you have to figure out which one. You pull one, and now more sand's coming. Wait, what? So you're trying to figure out riddles or puzzles. You're maybe disabling traps, or you're just traveling, and that's part of the exploration. You're having to travel from one place to the next, and can you get there safely without a lot of, if you're trying to do it secretly without being exposed, if you're whatever. So that part of the game is important. And then the third is the role playing. And that is that sometimes we picture that as being the acting part of the game, where you can use different voices, you can have people with different mannerisms that maybe come out, or the storytelling part of the game, which is really important. The social interaction part of the game. Right. And that can also bog the game down at times if you're focusing strictly on that. I know that one example I can use is that our group has gone into a city, and this happens, I think, with every group that plays, and someone in the group says, I want to go buy and trade in all this stuff. I need to go buy the best items available. Right. And you go with them, and you're watching and waiting as the barbarian's trying to intimidate the shopkeeper at a better price. Right. And the bard's trying to seduce them or whatever and try to get a better price that way. And there's all this haggling going on. Meanwhile, the other 3 or 4 characters are like, well, what do we do?
It's kind of like shopping in real life.
That's true.
Person buying all the stuff, having a good time. The rest of them like, oh, really?
Yeah, exactly.
So it can really start to bog down. But role playing can really, there is too much. But what we're saying is is such a thing as too much of each one of these aspects.
And I think that's what we're getting at, is the balance is you trying to be able to use all 3 pillars of this game in a way that all of them are being touched on and not focusing entirely on any one.
So what happens if you're as a DM, you're watching and you're like, this combat is taking too long? How is that? How are you going to fix that?
How would you fix it? So how I've done it, and I know how you've done it too, is you're the dungeon master. You're in control of the hit points, and if for some reason this guy keeps healing, or they're rolling really low, and they're not, just knock them down, or
that ended.
Knock them down to 1 hit point left or something. So one more hit, and they've gone through, and then the main bad guy, keep him up there, and that's been covered before too. But it's important to allow the players, because they're heroes, allow them to be heroic and to give your big bad guys some minions that are just 1 hit point guys. They still do the same damage. Right. So they still have a D8 plus whatever when they hit, but they only have 1 hit point. So when a player goes through and hits them once or twice, maybe they take out 2 in a scene or something. That's pretty epic for the player, and it makes the game go quicker.
So what about role playing? Let's say that shopping trip's going too long. How do you fix that?
Gosh. So I think you can do, it's really up to you, and depending on the situation there, you can have cops come in and say, you're the one I was looking for, or whatever. You can have, undead all of a sudden are springing up everywhere, and forget the shopping, we're just trying to survive. Or if it's at night, the werewolves come in. Whatever you want to do to bring it to another phase of the 3, or another pillar. Yeah. So if you want to go from the storytelling part to combat, then make something happen. An earthquake, a natural disaster happens, and your players are scrambling to find footing and find high ground or something. And what caused that earthquake? And is there a spellcaster up there doing something? Just change the scenario and get their minds on a different facet of the game and move things along a little bit.
All right, sounds good. So in exploration, if they were trapped in that room is filling full of sand, then...
And if they can't figure it out for some reason, and maybe you didn't do a good job of leaving them the things they needed to do to figure that out, or maybe the players themselves really just don't know what's going on. It's not a bad idea to just give them a better hint, leave something on the well, you notice there's a drawing on the table in front of you, and it's got one of these has been fingerprints all over it where there's not dust. So maybe that's the lever you would pull or whatever.
Right.
Just do something to help the players be like, I got it, and then move on.
Yeah.
Keep the game moving, because all of us enjoy playing. We enjoy every aspect of the game.
Right.
But I guess the biggest key would be read the table and find out what does your group really enjoy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's some tables like a lot of combat. Some of them like a lot of puzzles and traps and stuff. Some of them just want to role play some. You can bring tension into all of those phases as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even in role playing, they like the role play.
Yeah.
You know, the shopping trip, maybe not so much, but maybe it moves into a different phase where someone like the cops come. Maybe it's not going to, it may not result in combat, but now it's negotiation.
Right.
So it's a different phase of role playing. So there's really phases within the pillars. There's things that could change within that. So that still keeps it interesting, because I think one trap that you can say, well, I need a lot of combat to keep this thing interesting. Well, not necessarily. You can change things up, and you can keep it interesting by playing with each one of these pillars and creating tension in different ways. So it doesn't have to be that you have to add combat to everything. And
no, and it's not. There's not a magical number where it's 33%, 33%. It really depends on your gaming group.
Yeah.
Maybe like Mark said, your gaming group is more combat oriented. Right. So maybe it's 60, 20, 20, 50, 25, 25, whatever. Really feel out the table, figure out what they really enjoy. You may have a group of guys that really like optimizing, of players that really like optimizing their characters and using those abilities. And maybe right after they've leveled up, it may be a good idea to give them a combat experience where they can use those new things new spells that they've learned. Maybe a magic item they found on their last quest, something that they really are itching to get to do. And you don't want them stuck in you've got to go find the mayor, convince him to give you the map that'll lead you to the...
Yeah, that'd be bad too.
So
how do we know that we've fixed the problem? Like, how do you know that, okay, I tinkered with it, how do you know if it's working? Or what does that look like?
It's the answer every time, and that's if everyone's having fun.
Yeah.
If everyone's engaged, they're having fun. And it seems simple, but it's the truth. If everyone's having a good time, then you're doing it right. And don't try to fix it then. At that point, you feel as a dungeon master you're succeeding, because and don't be afraid to continue your story and to try to move them along a little bit. I mean, it is still a story being told. So Star Wars still had a Death Star that needed to be taken out, but yes, there was some other stories in the middle there that were mattering to the characters, the training of Luke and all those things that were happening. Han Solo was being his backstory. He's being hunted for something he did in the past, and there's a bounty out on him. So.
All right, good. So that sounds good. And speaking of fun, if you enjoy more having Dungeons and Dragons content, some tips and tricks, and more ideas, consider subscribing, and so you are aware of when we drop some of our videos.
Do not consider subscribing.
Yeah.
Please subscribe to the channel. Don't consider it. Just do it.
Yeah, just do it now. Just click now before you forget. And hopefully we got you some good player tips, and that will help you bring your players back into the game, help them get engaged. Once again, I think if you try these, you'll find that it does make the game better for you, and it'll solve that problem for you. I think that's all we have time for today, Gonzo.
Yeah.
And with that,
class dismissed.